Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about valuations and how critical they are for your property development projects. So how do you convince your valuer to be either at the high end or the low end of your particular project, depending upon what you're actually trying to achieve? Now, in order to do that, we've got a very special guest that's actually going to join us today, Jarod Collins. He is from Local Valuers Australia. So Jarod, welcome to the stage, mate.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the introduction. Pleasure to be here.
That's okay, mate. Now, valuers are a kind of love-hate type relationship. I tend to find, because depending upon who's engaging them. So if we are engaging them, we tend to love you because we want you to give us the outcome. But if a bank does it, usually we hate them because they're always conservative, mate. We're going to talk about today, how do we stay loving you guys the whole way?
That's actually well said, Rob, because sometimes we're labelled as a real estate agent, and sometimes we need to just be definitely on the lower end conservative spectrum for the bank to keep them happy, without giving too much information away to the customer either, who do want, a bullish higher end valuation typically.
Yeah, so maybe we can start right at the very, very beginning, and let's talk about what is a valuation.
Yeah, so a valuation, it's a valuation of a property, obviously. It initially starts with inspection of the property, full inspection, note taking. Nowadays, generally done device, taking all the information, photographs, etc., and then conducting a report based on comparisons of sales in the area, the current market we're in. I'm giving a brief rundown of evaluation, but it isn't that. And importantly, it's valued at that date. We inspect the property or instructed to value the property at the relevant date.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of key elements in there. So firstly, it's an opinion of an expert. So I guess a valuer does a 4-year degree in order to actually, be legally licensed to be able to do that. Plus, you've got to keep all your, your regulations and licenses up to date and that sort of thing, which is very, very different to an appraisal, where a real estate agent may have only done a couple of weeks course in order to actually come up with the valuation. So from that opinion of an expert perspective, what you do is actually, can stand up in a court of law to say, hey, that's actually valid, whereas an appraisal can't.
Yeah, it is legally binding. It's a lot more thorough than an appraisal, which generally might be a page or a couple of pages. And again, it's the value of the property as at that date, the fair market value, no regard to any additions or changes to the property or potentially what you could get if you did this, etc., etc. But it's meant to be fair for a potential seller or potential buyer. An arm's length transaction as at the date.
Arm's length transaction is super critical, because there are many, many times that we're going to see a transaction that's occurred, and we'll see it on, the titles office, whether we use RP Data, Price Finder, or other tools out there. We'll see the sale transaction, but in many instances, it's not an arm's length transaction.
Yeah, that's right. And until we're really privy to the contract of sale or the details of the transaction, we don't know, because there's so many rebates and incentives going on with properties and particularly developments now. Until we really see the contract and transaction, it is arm's length between a willing buyer and willing seller to determine the fair market value of the property.
Yeah, so that terminology, willing buyer and willing seller, there's a couple of little subtleties that sit in and around that. So that willing seller can't be in any sort of distress. They have to be, selling because they just want to sell, as opposed to, hey, somebody's foreclosing on them and things like that. And it equally can't be, an ill-informed purchaser. So someone who's out of area, overseas.
Yeah, that's right.
If they're an ill-informed, it's possible that they'll pay more, but they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, and without compulsion and acted knowledgeably and prudently and independently. So, and that's
all of that. All of that has been tried and tested in court many years ago. I believe in 1907 it was Spencer versus Commonwealth, and they came up with a whole bunch of rules that said what is a fair market appraisal, or a fair valuation, I should say. So it was not an anxious seller, I guess a willing and informed buyer, arm's length transaction. There was a couple of other elements that sit in there. I don't know if you can remind me.
Yeah, willing seller and buyer, arm's length transaction, proper marketing, etc. Acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. And that, I suppose that's where a lot of people do engage valuers, whether they're selling or buying a property, because unfortunately they mightn't have full faith in the agent sometimes. So they do want that independent advice, and actual getting a report provided to them to give them a realistic indication of the value of the property.
And I guess where it can, sometimes we've got tools like RP Data or Price Finder or other tools that actually represent what the sale value is, but we don't necessarily have the visibility that sits in the back end about those things. Were they willing and informed? Were they over anxious? Were they?
That's right.
I guess so. Whilst we might see a transaction that's actually hit the records, and sometimes we go, well, that's what we think it's worth. It's not necessarily how a valuer is going to see it's worth, or a bank is going to see how it's worth. So it's critically important we actually understand how a valuation is actually done, because when we go to the bank and say, hey, we would like some money, we're going to know how they're thinking. And if we don't know how they're thinking, we might think it's a cracking deal, but we can't prove it to them. And that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's right. And further to what you're saying, there might be a sale in the street or around the corner that sold off market, and the recorded sale price might include, another property down the road or an estate from somewhere else, and it just isn't fair. But RP Data will show that sale price. Or sometimes even the wrong price will even be recorded. So just relying on databases and Googling, just, for properties and location specific, you're really not going to know what your property is worth, without getting an expert to provide a proper valuation, I suppose.
So then that leads us to the next question. Now that we know what a valuation is compared to an appraisal, then there's, I guess, different ways to actually engage a valuer. So if we tend to go to the bank and say, hey, we want a loan, then the bank will go and engage the valuer themselves. And typically they're going to do that through a panel, where I guess they'll lodge a request into the panel, and that panel will then randomize who the valuer is that's actually assigned. And they are operating under the instruction of the bank. And because they're operating under the instruction of the bank, if the bank wants them to be conservative, that's probably where they'll be. If the bank, I guess, wants them to be a little bit more aggressive, that's probably where they'll be. But us, as the, I guess, the purchaser, we don't really get to influence that.
No, you don't. And, there's a lot of valuers out there. Some are on panels and some aren't. I'm on some panels and I'm not on others. But you might get referred to do a valuation, or Rob, you might ask me to do a valuation of one of your properties. And I can definitely do that, but there's no guarantee, you'll be able to use that valuation. It could go to your bank, but they're going to reject it and tell you they're going to use their panel valuer. That's not to say that it won't help the cause, but typically, you're out of the equation once you do request a valuation. It is randomly allocated. You might meet the valuer, but you'll get the result, or sometimes you won't even know what the result is, and the bank will get the valuation and go from there.
Well, we're going to try and help everyone by the end of this conversation to go, how do we give some input into that process to try and land, I guess, a better outcome for us. But that really then comes down to the other way to engage a valuer, which is to, I guess, engage, I guess, a private valuer or a contract valuer, where we get to control, I guess, the instructions that are actually given.
Yeah, you can have a lot more open discussion with them, engage them initially, explain the situation, the scenario, the property. You could, give them information that you want, sales, other reports, or anything to try have that open discussion compared to, the bank is engaging that valuer, and the valuer is doing it for the bank, not the customer. So there's, a lot of barriers there that take place. So providing you with a valuation independently addressed to you allows that, thorough and open discussion. And you can actually see the report too, and read it and see the data and evidence and sales, and then even come back to me with some, points of difference or discussion to maybe change that again.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we are not experts. You guys are. But if we can provide anything that's going to assist you in actually getting that. So if we're privy, for example, as area experts, we might be privy to an off-market sale that's actually happened because we've got a great relationship with that particular agent.
Yep.
We can bring that to your attention, and, that can help, bolster a valuation, for example, if we know that was a great sale.
Yeah, definitely. And often you will get feedback or queries about valuations, and the ones, the long emails with slabs of information typically don't, do much. It's more the ones with data and evidence, a list of a few sales, or, like you said, the most relevant sale up the street or around the corner, or whatever you think is relevant, to provide the valuer with something else to look at, or he mightn't have used before. Rates notices and things like that don't, bear much weight with the current market value of a property, that sort of thing. But definitely providing them with actual evidence rather than your opinion or what you think is what's going to, have more weight.
Yeah. So shouting the occasional coffee, does that help, mate?
Oh, it can, and definitely it's relationships, but you've got to be careful, especially if it's for the bank and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? That comes back to market value definition, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, and for the fact that there are two different types, there's the panel valuer and the contract valuer.
Yeah.
They're generally used for very, very different purposes. So a panel valuer is typically when you're actually trying to get a mortgage of some description.
Yeah.
Then the bank is going to engage their panel. Now, sometimes they have their own private panel. Sometimes they have a market panel that is open. But it's typically the big valuation firms that are actually going to be on those panels.
Yeah.
Whereas a contract valuer, I guess, looks at a lot of the other kinds of reasons why you might, be needing a valuation. So things like family law, pre-sales, pre-purchase valuations, capital gains tax, and a whole bunch of other things like that.
Yeah, and panel bank valuers, they're generally experts and specialists in their area. They're specific to locations and areas, but they are under a lot of pressure with turnaround times and producing the reports, and will often do 7 or 8 a day, whereas a contract valuer or more boutique valuer will have a more variety of work, and they can provide a more thorough report. Now, there is that mentality of bank valuers being conservative and all of that, but they still should be doing the fair market value of the property, the current market value based on sales and evidence. So there's no reason they need to be super conservative if there is sales and evidence there to support the value of the property. But definitely there are different types, and my day is a lot different to a standard bank valuer, in terms of the variety of work or expectations on workload, discussions I can have with clients and customers, compared to the expectations of a bank valuer.
Yeah. So what are some of the reasons? I touched on a couple of things, but what are some of the other, purposes that you might actually engage a contract valuer for?
Yeah, tax purposes, like Rob, if you have some investment properties, capital gains purposes, whether it's the current value of the property or you need that retrospectively, to determine the capital gain of the property, stamp duty purposes, family law. We try and do a lot of mediation reports. So before it actually does eventuate to family law, which would save the customer time and money too, to try and negotiate the deal before getting to court. Business valuations, I'm not a business valuer, but they can be done. There's all types, and that's the beauty of a contract valuer, independent valuer, I suppose.
Yeah. So clearly clearly the purpose of that valuation is going to potentially influence where within the range, because there's always a range the valuations actually occur. Is it going to be at the high end of the range or the low end of the range? That is, I guess, legally defendable. And that's probably the most important part.
Yeah, and that comes back to, as you said before, we'd like to have discussions with the customer and client around the circumstance of the property, what's the purpose, what it's for, and again, it comes back to the sales and the data and evidence. As long as there's sales to support a higher end or a lower end valuation, it can be justified to help the customer out, definitely. So, and again, back on the tax capital gains valuations, often you might need them at the upper end or lower end. So being able to justify that, definitely can be done.
Yeah. And so where we want to influence the bank panel valuer, I guess, is there any merit in engaging a contract valuer to actually do a pre-report, make sure that we actually, because we have visibility of that and we can actually provide our insights and input into that process. Is there merit in actually doing that and then handing that report to the panel valuer?
Definitely. And the contract valuer will always come back to their code of ethics and their job as a valuer anyway, and provide their opinion and fair market value of the property. But if you can, again, discuss with them and provide them with evidence to support your figure that the bank or panel valuer may have missed or not seen, and hopefully that'll provide them with some evidence and data to be able to support what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Now, we have to be clear here, folks, that they're under no obligation to, I guess, accept that report, and because they're going to do their own independent research themselves. But if you have been diligent and thorough and put a professional report together, then it's going to make their day easier by actually going, well, you've already done all the comparable sales for me. All I need to do is validate that they're legitimate.
And even just the general information on the property too, Rob, the house, the improvements, it just saves. Valuers are very time poor. So any information like that is only going to speed up and help the exercise.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it's certainly worthwhile to actually to do, I guess, that element. Now, in putting that together, I guess, in putting any valuation together, there's a couple of challenges that actually kind of sit in here, and we're going to walk through each of the challenges, because us as developers, we need to be understanding what these challenges are so we can actually both help you and also understand how the bank is actually thinking as well. So when we buy a property, I guess often it's in a raw state and it's got development potential and those sorts of things, but it can be valued for lots of different ways. So it can be valued in its current as-is situation. It could be valued, I guess, at the future state with regards to the development potential of it. And it will also be valued as if the project is actually complete. So the different stages of that. But from a valuation perspective, you guys are only legally allowed to do it at a specific date at a point in time. You're not allowed a crystal ball and read the future. So we've got to think about, well, if I buy it as is, where is, that's at today's value. And if I'm doing the as if complete, then you can't predict the future. So you have to again go, well, as is, where is, what would that thing be if it suddenly materialized itself in today's market right now? If I could hit a button, jump in the TARDIS, travel in time, and all of a sudden these things just miraculously turned up, what would it be worth in today's market? So what challenges does that create for you guys?
Yeah, it definitely creates challenges, but it's also keeping it simple too, in a sense, Rob, because as if complete, mainly what you're talking about then, as if complete, which is probably the most risky property, in the market now, especially the landscape we're in, is we just look at it purely based on it being finished and completed now in today's market, and compared to sales and transactions in the market we're in. And there'll be appropriate commentary around that in the report and the valuation to to clarify that that is the value of the property based on it being finished now in today's market. And that's a risk developers and lenders will take because, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And we can only have regard to the evidence and sales that are there now based on it being finished.
Yeah, we don't know anything about are GFCs happening? Are there
construction costs keep increasing, development costs? We don't, we can't really have regard to that, and that's the risk. Developers, banks, lenders are taking, I suppose, on products.
So, as a developer, what that means for you, is as markets change. Because our project timeline will take time, sometimes our projects will take several years to actually from start to complete. We need to be aware of, is the market going up or down from where we are, and factor that into our risk rating of our projects. So the bank will have an internal process that they do there. But what they're trying to do is to say, well, if it works in today's market, then they're then going based on where we think the market's going. Do we think that that's an acceptable risk? So if the market is shooting up, then chances are the bank's going to see that a little bit more favorably. If the potential for the market is to go down, then they're probably going to be a little bit more conservative of that and make sure that you've actually got your numbers stacked in. But even a down market can still work out for a very positive outcome, just not as much profit as you'd like. So there's risk ratings that actually need to be allocated into those.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of risk and commentary around that, and especially talking, development valuations. That's why the banks will typically request, more than one valuation figure on the project. The as is or alternate use of the property now in the current market, but then all your, again, as if complete or off the plan sales and gross realisation, and put into feasibilities, which is such a big thing now, whether it's the valuer's feasibility or the bank's feasibility, to determine the risk and how the project is going to pan out, based on the funding and project-related site value and all these sort of things.
Yeah, so you touched on one there, so project-related site value. So if we're getting a valuer to assess our project for its development potential, how most people do their feasibilities is, what am I buying it for? Then what are the costs? And we add up. Then what do I think it's going to sell for? And can I live with the gap?
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas what you're talking about is actually the opposite. So that's called a bottom-up feasibility. Whereas what you're doing with a project-related site value is actually doing a top-down. So what is the finished product going to sell for? Subtract the profit that the developer is meant to make if this is going to be a successful project. Then start subtracting the costs, and then whatever is left over is the maximum that they should be paying in order to lock in the profits.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
So, and that's the tricky thing in today's market and landscape we're in, Rob, especially with the costs for development escalations, finance costs, professional fees, etc. Often you will get scenarios where the project-related site value or the feasibility will be less or far inferior to the as-is market value of the property as a standard land valuation. I recently did a valuation in outer suburbs, apartment site approval for 92 apartments over 10 levels. The gross realisation value, the as if complete individual apartment values look great and stack up and all that. You do come up with a really good gross realisation project value. But once you put that into the feasibility, because there's no pre-sales, the costs to do all this, escalations, etc., the project-related site value actually came in less than the as-is land value that the developer purchased it for. Now, that's pretty common at the moment. That's not to say the project won't work, because, as I said, the gross realisation is really good, but it creates a lot of barriers for developers and lenders and banks for funding.
And so we need to be understanding that, I guess, from a valuer's perspective, you're going to do effectively two valuations.
Yes.
So
all three almost,
and so understanding that those different valuations are sitting there, what is the highest and best use for that particular property? Is it leave it as is, where is? Is it knock it down? Is it put six 3-bedroom townhouses on there, or is it put 4 4-bedroom townhouses? Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So lots of different scenarios where, you know, sometimes highest and best use is not necessarily maximum yield, because if that area is not wanting that particular product, it doesn't matter if you can fit more of them. Yeah,
definitely location and market specific, and then, you know, adding on or putting in your construction and building costs, which continue, you know, I keep repeating that, but it's just the biggest barrier at the moment for developers, as you probably know.
And our job as developers is to find that highest and best use for the product type that we're actually creating. Give that justification to the valuer and say, we've already found what we believe to be highest and best use. You can now, I guess, validate that.
And you know, like sites, and it's still location for property, like sites in desirable locations with limited, you know, competing supply. These sort of things suited to boutique schemes remain really well sought still. You know, generally they'll offer above average access, location, you know, these sort of things, closer to amenity. It's still keeping it simple compared to the, you know, sites at the other end of the scale, which, you know, design constraints and all these sort of things that hold it back with increased costs or access, et cetera, et cetera. Makes it really tricky.
So that's, I guess, just one of our challenges is I guess, making that highest and best use actually make sure that it is at least in range with, I guess, the current site as is, where is type valuation. That if we can do that, that's our first challenge, right? Second challenge, we kind of touched on this a little bit before, but I guess the fact that markets are constantly changing, and you can only do a valuation at a point in time, typically today. Sometimes if the market is going up, right, and it's going up at a rapid rate of knots, your comparable sales, if the market's here or the contract price is here, the comparables are actually at a lower point, and the previous comparables at a much lower point. So trying to justify the current raw site value in a market that's shooting off can be quite challenging.
Yeah, definitely. But that valuers really should be having regard to the market conditions too. And that probably comes back to your point of engaging an independent contract valuer if you disagree with, you know, previous bank valuation or current bank valuation that is using sales in inferior or superior market conditions to show the allowances where it should be at. But it is definitely a challenge. You know, how much allowances do you make, especially for apartments and off the plan or townhouse sales and stuff like that. You've really got to, but that is a valuer's job, you know, different to an agent again.
And the opposite is also true if the market is dropping. So as the market is dropping, it might be plummeting like a stone, but the previous valuations are actually at a higher price point. So in that instance, it's actually easier to actually justify the sale price.
Correct.
But it might actually create a risk in the project that I guess the developer needs to be aware of. In that, and again, value is going to give a risk rating of the fact that the market is falling, and that valuation may not last long.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, valuations last for 90 days, 3 months. So, you know, it's always a moving beast, and that's often why banks and lenders will continually update their valuations, especially for developments, to, you know, see where the market is sitting at that current date. Because as we know, the landscape we're in, it's been changing no matter what state you're in, you know, up and down, fluctuating all the time. So, and it does give rise again to utilise an independent valuer, no matter what circumstance.
Yeah. So given all of that, mate, we know that there's a range. We know that there's a high end. We know there's a low end. We know there's panel valuers. We know there's contract valuers. If we're wanting a specific outcome, if we're wanting it to be at the low end of the range, or if we're wanting it to be at the high end of the range, what are some of the things that we can do to, I guess, give the instructions correctly to the valuer to make sure that they're looking at it with, I guess, the right angle and perspective?
Yeah, I think as we said before, Rob, like obviously figuring out the purpose of the valuation to start with. What are we doing it for? And some valuers will do ranges, some won't do ranges. They'll typically just provide the valuation that they are giving. I like to give a range because I think all properties have a range. Yeah, they do, let's be honest. So I think any information, whether it's relating to the property, what you've done, any additions or any potential additions you're going to do to the property. But again, it really comes back to the market and the sales and the area, and providing anything that you really think is directly comparable. Probably, like I said before, less is more, I think, with that. Regurgitated data, from the internet, or big lists of sales evidence really doesn't narrow it down. Finding one or two to help your case, whether you're wanting it at the upper end or lower end, is what you really need to do. And typically trying to keep it within a range of 3 to 6 months if we are talking the current market. If we're doing retrospective valuations for tax or other purpose, probate or estate purposes, we can broaden the range quite a bit to make the exercise work.
Yeah, and so from that side of things, because the valuation is valid for, as you said, 90 days, if you're looking at a valuation, say 10 years ago, because you're trying to do a retrospective, that 90 days has already expired.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but your relevant date, your valuation date.
Yeah. So, but the ability for that valuation to be tested in the market 10 years ago, for example, has gone. So that's never going to get tested. So a valuer is more likely to have, I guess, a little bit of flexibility in that than something that's going to be tested in the market right here, right now. He's going to put a valuation on it, and you're going to go put it on the market today. And that valuation can potentially be tested, within a matter of weeks. That might have an impact on his insurance policy if he gets it wrong.
And it's really interesting that too, Rob, because I totally agree with what you're saying. And I do find it interesting how some valuers will still inspect a property for a retrospective valuation in the 1990s, when the property's completely different now or not there. You know what I mean? So it will, and it is retrospective. I think it more comes back to, again, keeping it simple, but having the sales and the evidence in that location, in that area, to provide a range for the property, and that's more than justified, I think. So,
which I guess kind of takes me on a side tangent. How and when do they do a desktop valuation where they never attend, versus they must attend? And I see them with their laser pointers kind of measuring the distances of every single room.
Yeah.
Why would they go one and not the other?
Yeah, I think typically, again, comparing the two sort of types of valuers, your bank panel valuer will typically do that when the property or the loan to value ratio is a lot less, or the loan amount is a lot less. So what they're lending against will be a lot lower, or the owner / customer's personal circumstances are different to requiring a full valuation. It's definitely moved to more of that desktop hybrid, quick, efficient valuation if they can do that, relying on data that's provided. But again, you don't know if there's a bathroom that's been gutted or there's a something out the back, but typically they will only lend on a lower amount. Desktops can be done for other purposes, like for a contract value, again for the tax or the stamp duty. They don't require full inspections. There'll be clauses around that sort of thing as well with the data, and typically it'll cost the customer less to get a desktop valuation too, which is more than suitable if it's for non-mortgage or lending purposes.
Yeah, very good. So, okay, let's get onto some controversial or potentially controversial type, I guess, conversations. So I've seen in the past instances where trying to sell, I guess, stock in a project, where one valuer is more than happy to use sales in my own project to justify the valuation of the next sale in my own project. And yet I've seen other valuers that are not willing to do that. What's the, I guess, the logical reason as to why one would think that that's acceptable and one would not think it's acceptable?
It's interesting that, because, like as you said, valuers do vary. A lot of valuers will just completely throw them out and not have, any regard to it. But my opinion is you should have regard to the sales in the complex, in the development, whether they're pre-sales or standard off the plan sales. You need to then go into the circumstances around those sales. You can have regard to them, but you not full regard to them, if that makes sense. You do have to rely on sales outside the complex to arrive at your opinion of value. So you can't just utilise the one.
You can't use that in
no, that's what I was getting at. Not in isolation. You can have regard to them and note them and, provide the information around them, but your habits needs to be based on sales. Again, back to our market value definition, not to say these sales weren't, to provide our opinion, because again, until we see the full contracts and understand the selling around these properties with scenarios, incentives, rebates, etc.
So there could have been an interstate or ill-informed purchaser or all sorts of things that actually
overseas, or they bought 5 or 6, and the price is spread across all of them, things like that.
Yeah. So I guess in doing those sorts of things, why is an interstate buyer or an overseas buyer, why are they deemed to be ill-informed? And why is their sale price, I guess, excluded? And quite often the bank themselves, if they have a pre-sale requirement, they'll actually say, well, that doesn't count as a pre-sale.
If they're from interstate,
Yeah.
I suppose, it comes back to the market value definition. Have they acted, willingly and independently? But I still think you've got to have regard to that. So not have regard to it, but you've still got to note it and discuss around it and provide the information for each pre-sale. So, it just comes back to the details around the sale, I suppose. Yeah. And as valuers, all you can really do is provide that information to the bank, full disclosure of each sale, and then they can make their own decision, really.
Yeah. So one of the things you touched on a couple of seconds ago, and we kind of glossed over it really quickly, but I'll loop back around, incentives and rebates in a contract. So firstly, what are they? How do they show up? And how are they treated from a valuation perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, Rob, because often valuers or, even people generally in the market won't even know about the incentives or rebates until they're privy to the contract or actually buying a property themselves. I recently did a valuation in Tasmania for a couple of stage subdivision. It was about 80 lots at the back end of a master planned estate, which was actively selling other lots in other stages. And the developer actually said to me, don't use those sales. Probably comes back to what we were talking about before, sales and new development too, because he said, the agent's actually selling them with quite big incentives, etc., and the sale prices aren't reflective of market value. So unless he told me that, I wouldn't have known though. And the sales would have been recorded and noted on file, like you said, and their valuer could have regard to them and price their lot prices up similar to that. So I don't know, Rob, do you see a bit of that, do you, the incentives and stuff?
I tend to see it for the bigger developers. I don't tend to see a lot of it for the smaller guys. So they might give furniture packages, they might give stamp duty rebates and things like that, where, if they've got a major project, 50, 100, I guess, dwellings going out, if they can pump the tires on the first couple of sales and get those price points really high, the next incoming purchaser, they're not privy to those bonuses that are actually sitting there. All they do is see the sale price, and so they will, well, if that's what they paid, then I probably need to pay the same. And so that's kind of, but it tends to be the bigger projects that do that, not the smaller guys, because if they give a $10,000 furniture package as an example, and they're doing 100 lots, that's 100 lots times 10K that they've just lifted their sale price by. But if I'm doing a duplex or a 4-pack or something like that, I tend to not see as much of that at that point.
Yeah, and I think the general rule as a valuer now, whether you're doing, you know, an individual vacant lot in a newer state or a new apartment that's just finished, a rule of thumb, you will again note the sales potentially. A lot of valuers won't put them in the report, but they'll only rely on sales in this state that have sold later on through a local agent after it's been sold as a developer sale. If that makes sense. So it's essentially,
which could take years.
Back to that market. Yeah. That's right. So,
but in short, though, I guess if you have the visibility, then you're going to take, take that into account and kind of discount the price point. That you need access to that contract to actually do that. But if you don't have visibility, or you don't have a suspicion to go and investigate, what's the chances of that actually being identified?
Yeah, it's very hard to identify it. And I think all a valuer can do, again, is provide the context around the sale, developer sale, you know, commentary and clauses around not knowing the full details, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the information they've been provided.
Okay. Well, and I guess last one, as developers, we're trying to sell our finished product, and we're trying to convince the bank that the product that we're creating is the right kind of product. The as-if valuation, right? What can we do as developers to help the valuer to actually understand exactly what is the product that we are actually creating? Because, you know, a 3-bedroom townhouse could be a high-end luxury something, or it could be a super budgety thing. What are the things that we need to give you to help you to actually understand how do you compare that to other stock?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things to this. Again, for banks and lenders too, we need to see it's going to be a fully completed property, you know, and that includes landscaping and all the works too. Because as soon as a bank or a bank valuer sees there's something missing, they'll label it incomplete property, and it'll need repairs to finish, and that'll create more issues for the bank. But a full list. This is probably opposite what I said before. More is better for something like this. We really need to see the ins and outs of the property, but that's not to go overboard either, because we are still only valuing it as a completed apartment or townhouse or whatever.
Absolutely. So, mate, very, very informative. So thank you very much for that. What are some final tips and tricks if somebody wants to engage a contract valuer, or they want to lift their price points with their bank valuer? What are some tips and tricks that you would say just to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think, Rob, the beauty of local valuers and independent valuers, contract valuers, there is a broad range of, you know, expertise we can assist with, whether that's, you know, the pre-purchase or pre-sale of a property, or general advice around developments, especially too, where you can get caught out, which does come back to the highest and best use. You know, land banking and things like that is still an issue with zoning and people being caught out with stuff like that. Any independent advice. But for your standard homeowner, engaging us to start that preliminary assessment is a really useful tool, I think. And you can provide us with any information you want. But like I said, probably less is more. Really nail down on the sales in the area and the current market you're in, and its location and market specific, really.
Good.
To keep it simple.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you sharing your insights today. And for those of you out there who've only recently come across us, just to let you know, not only do we run these Sunday sessions, but we also run networking groups all the way around the country. So we run physical events in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. We also live stream them. So no matter where you are, you can be located in Melbourne and watching a Brisbane event and vice versa. So you can watch these anywhere around the country. So if you want to get more, I guess, direct contact to industry experts just like Jarod here today, then why don't you come to one of those events? Mate, thank you very much for your time. It's been greatly appreciated, and hopefully, mate, I'll see you at one of our upcoming events.
No, great. Thanks a lot, Rob, and look forward to all the new developments coming out of the podcast. So thanks
guys.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.